Hey guys, welcome back. It's another 6th grade Heritage Studies Ancient Civ Cultural Geo video. This is for Unit 2. This is going to be Unit 2 Part 2 or Part B, which is Israel. This is once again, from my 6th grade Unit 2, which started off with Egypt. Now we're going to talk about Israeli history in the same one. So ancient Israel. Basics, 291 BC to AD 70. We're focusing on the ancient world like we talked about. Split into several distinct time periods, and I kind of squish some of them together for time's sake. But we got 10 total time periods we're going to talk about. Patriarchs, Exodus, Conquest, Judges, Kingdom, Exile, and Return to Greek rule, which is a long one. Revolt, Roman rule, and then finally destruction. So just before we know where Israel is on the map, there we go. It's located on the western side of the Mediterranean Sea. It borders Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, right over here. And I picked out this picture. It's a really pretty picture, but you see the, just kind of a, combination. You got the Christian church located next to one of the Tower Mosques, located next to the Dome of the Rock, and it's known as the Land of Three Faiths, or the Abrahamic faith. Obviously, Judaism, Christianity, and then Islam being the most recent. And they've kind of, in that city, in Jerusalem right now, and really in that part of the world, trying to figure out who they are, between those three religions. So the Jordan River is the most prominent river that runs through the western side of it. It provides a lot of good farmland around it. Has several lakes, the Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee, things like that, as you're working your way up. And this is the Israeli flag, which has the Star of David on it. The Patriarch time period, first time period. Find this in the very early on in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. Abram, who became Abraham, left behind the world he knew to follow God. Leads to the Abrahamic covenant, one of the great covenants of the Old Testament. In Genesis 12, 1 through 7, Abraham's descendants would become a great nation, and the world would be blessed by them. Then you have Isaac, Abraham's son. Isaac's son Jacob, who had his name changed to Israel, one who wrestles with God, and then Joseph being Israel's son. Israel would also have 12 other sons, which would become the different tribes of Israel. So, long beard to shortest beard, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob / Israel, and then his son, Joseph. The Exodus time period. Moshe, or Moses, as he's known in the Israelite Egyptian prince, leader of the Hebrews out of slavery. He's going to establish the next of the four covenants, and we're going to talk about the Mosaic covenant in Exodus 19, 3 through 6. If the Israelites followed God's laws, God will bless them. If not, God will punish them. That is what we know as a, oh my goodness, what is the word? Not a contrasting thing. It's some form of covenant where, if you hold up your end of the bargain, things will go well for you. If don't, then the bargain's off. The 10 plagues, I'm asking you, what were they? We're going to kind of spell those out in the next slide, so be paying attention. The Passover, we've known, the story of the lamb's blood over over the Hebrews' doorways in Egypt, and the angel of death passed over, which is where we get that Passover from, and that's a big and very, very important festival. It's going to pop back up. The Exodus, by scholars, started in 1446 BC. Kind of the conclusion of that time period with God giving the Hebrews 10 commandments through Moses at Mount Sinai before their wanderings in the desert. You got Moses and the burning bush, and your 10 plagues right here. Waters to blood, frogs, gnats, or lice, swarms of flies, animals sick die, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and then firstborn boys die. So I've got some videos I'm going to have us watch later on as we're going through, but we kind of are familiar with the story of Moses. Conquest. After Moses' death, Joshua, the second in command, is appointed the leader of the Hebrews, and he's going to lead them into battles to conquer Canaan and the Promised Land. He is ordered by God to destroy all the Canaanites and all of their inhabitants living in the land. Starts off with the famous Battle of Jericho, which is when they first cross over into the Promised Land. where they marched around everything. Got a funny video for you guys to watch on that. God parted the Jordan River to lead them into Canaan, just like he parted the Red Sea to lead them out of Egypt. A lot of poetic thoughts and writings here about this time period. That's your third one. Is the ancient Jericho with 2 walls around it. Yeah, of course, VeggieTales. We'll watch that later on. After Canaan, the Promised Land has been conquered. It's going to be known as Israel. Judges are going to be the leaders of Israel. They're going to be chosen by God to save and shepherd them. Kind of follows a cycle. The people of God fall away from worshiping God. The Hebrews fall away from worshiping God. He allows them to be conquered. He rises up a judge, a leader to help save them. They turn back to worshiping God. And then after a couple of years, they go back into that pattern. It's just a vicious cycle that keeps on going and going and going. Leaders included both men and women. You're going to have people like Gideon, Samson, Deborah. The last judge and the first prophet was Samuel, and Samuel is going to anoint the first 2 kings of an organized, unified Israel, which would be Saul, and then later on David, which is going to lead us into the next one. But you got Samson bringing down the temple that he's stationed on the Philippines, and then Samuel anointing a young David here with oil. Kingdom time period. Only lasted for about 100 years, but it turned Israel during this time into a force to truly be reckoned with in that part of the world, in the Middle East. 1020 BC, Saul is anointed, becomes the first king of Israel. He was a good leader, very charismatic, very handsome, very strong, good warrior, but he kind of turned his back on God pretty early on. Because of this, while he is still king, David is going to be anointed, and he and David are going to have numerous issues where Saul tries to kill David, and then David tries to get back at Saul, and going back and forth until finally Saul is killed off by the Philistines. In 1002 BC, David becomes the king of Israel. He defeats the Philistines, he captures Jerusalem and makes it his capital city, and he winds up doubling the size of his kingdom. And he dies in 961 BC. He would establish the Davidic covenant, or God would establish the Davidic covenant with him. In 2 Samuel 7:8 through 17, God would establish David's throne forever, his dynasty forever, and he's going to accomplish this not in an earthly kingdom format, but through Jesus Christ, who's from the line of David, born in the city of David. And he is going, one day, when he comes back and establishes his kingdom forever, that covenant will be fulfilled. 961 BC, Solomon, after David's death, becomes king, known as the wisest and richest king ever, best known for building up the temple of Jerusalem. The first one had 700 wives, which eventually would expose him to polytheism. So doesn't really finish his rule as strong as he started, and he's going to rule until 922 BC. So, Saul, a very young David, and then Solomon. 922 BC. Partially because of Solomon's disobedience towards God, after he dies, Israel is going to enter a time of civil war, and it's going to split in half. The northern kingdom of Israel would be under Jeroboam, Solomon's one of his main court officials. The southern kingdom of Judah will be under Rehoboam, which is Solomon's son. 200 years after that, 722, Israel, the northern kingdom, would be worshiping false idols and would be conquered by the Assyrians, who would eventually intermarry with them and form a group of people known as the Sumerians. And then 586 BC, so about 150 years after that, Chaldean king Nebuchadnezzar, already talked about him, will conquer Judah. He will destroy Jerusalem and the temple, took all people captive, and forced them into exile. Those who are going to be left are going to be scattered into the surrounding countrysides around the southern kingdom of Judah. This is known as the Jewish diaspora, or the scattering, dispersal of the people. During this time period, through several of the prophets, the new covenant, Jeremiah 31 through 40, was established, and God would change the hearts of the people who want to serve, follow, and love him. And this, of course, is going to be accomplished through the Holy Spirit. Let's see how much time we got left. Oh, we're good. So, divided kingdom, circa around 920 BC, Jeroboam and the northern kingdom, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, with the southern kingdom of Judah. Capital city of Israel of the north is going to be Samaria. Capital kingdom of the south is going to be Jerusalem. Starting in 538, this is a return to Greek rule time period. Cyrus the Great of Persia began allowing Jews to return to their homelands and start to rebuild Jerusalem and the surrounding areas in Israel. Prophets and priests who followed God led the way, such as Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. A lot of the lesser prophets, not in terms of their importance, just in terms of the length of their books that they wrote. Eventually, Alexander the Great and his Macedonian Greek armies conquered the Persians, so Judea, Israel, instead of being part of the Persian Empire, becomes part of the Greek Empire and changed hands a lot. In 176 BC, ruled by the Seleucids, part of the Greeks, Antiochus IV began stealing treasures from the temple in Jerusalem and tried to systematically destroy the Jewish faith. Not the first time this has happened, definitely not the last time it has happened either. So, a lot of ancient manuscripts and carvings depict the Israeli people being taken captive, being forced from their homelands, fighting for their very existence. Here you see the destruction of the temple, and you see a menorah, one of the famous candelabras, being taken off. Revolt. Around this time period, 167 BC, Mattathias, or Mattasiyahu, a Jewish priest, began to lead an uprising against the Seleucids and the Greeks. After his death, his son, Judah Maccabee, or Judas Maccabeus, depending if you're reading the Hebrew or Greek translation, known as the Hammer, took over the revolt. He finally retook Jerusalem, fulfilling a prophecy found in Daniel 8:11-14. They had 8 days for a festival, and a miracle that happened during that time, which allowed the preservation of sacred oil for the lighting of the sacred candles, became known as Hanukkah. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we work through the unit. In 160 BC, the Jews and Seleucids ended their conflict, and the Jews were allowed to set up their own kingdom with their own rules once again. And there's Judah Maccabee, the hammer, right here, and the Hanukkah candles right here. 63 BC, Romans take control over Judea, and Herod is named the king, which is more like a ceremonial governor of that region. Around 6 BC, Jesus Christ is going to be born in Bethlehem, and he is the Messiah. He conspired against by Jewish priests, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, performed many miracles, won a lot of following, and started the largest religion in the world. Around 30 AD, Jesus is crucified in Jerusalem by the Romans, but Christianity, despite that, begins to grow and spread from there. Finally, the last little phase, the destruction of Jerusalem. After the death of Christ, more and more unrest in the Roman Empire. Corrupt rulers would steal and harass the Jews. In AD 68, Emperor Nero sent Vespasian to subdue forcefully all of Judea. But this would be delayed by a Roman civil war. So a couple years after that, in 70 AD, Vespasian's son Titus, the general of his army, and his army surrounded Jerusalem. No one could enter and no one could leave, signifying the start of a siege or siege warfare. Finally, the Romans break into the city and take the city after many months of fighting, destroy the temple and most of the city. And this was the end of Israel as an organized nation until 1948. So this is the Colosseum in Rome right here, but in front of the Colosseum, right next to it, is the Arch of Titus, which illustrates his victory in a different panel over the Jews in Jerusalem. You see the Roman soldiers taking some of the treasures from the temple, including a Hanukkah candle stand. That's in front of it. All right, here's your mini quiz. So make sure you go ahead and answer all of these questions. Be prepared to answer them online to Google Classroom as well for your grade. List the 10 periods of ancient history in Israel. What is the Abrahamic covenant? What is the Mosaic covenant? Who are the first 3 kings of an organized and unified Israel? And who is known as the Hammer? I appreciate it, guys, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and seeing you guys soon.